By late afternoon, the air inside the Battalion Tactical Operations Center felt thicker than the dust outside the blast walls. Northern Iraq in 2017 was all hard edges and heat concrete barriers. Concertina wire and a sky so pale it seemed bleached. But inside the talk, the world narrowed down to light, green from radios, blue from laptop screens, and the harsh whitewash of fluorescent tubes buzzing overhead. A full battalion was about to move. Maps were spread across folding tables, covered in transparent overlays and grease pencil symbols. Icons for companies and platoons marched across the projected route like careful chess pieces. All pointed toward a town clinging to the edge of the Syrian border, a place ISIS had turned into a knot of fighting positions, tunnels, and IED belts. Major Elena Torres stood at the front of the room beside the main map board. Her sleeves were rolled just enough to show a tan line and the edge of an old scar on her forearm. She wore no theatrics, no swagger, just a desert tuniform blouse, subdued rank, and a lanyard for her ID that was frayed at one side from years of use. She held a dry erase marker instead of a rifle, but everyone in the room knew the decisions. MAJ here would kill or save more people than any single trigger pull. The main effort pushes along Route Saber, she said, tracing a red line east to west. Her voice was steady, unhurried. Alpha and Bravo staggered column, Charlie in. Trail, we've got 2 potential choke points on this stretch, here and here. Both are single-lane constrictions with limited bypass. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Harris, sat forward in his chair, elbows on his knees, watching the map more than her face. Around the room, company commanders and senior NCOs stood or leaned against walls, their notepads half full, their expressions somewhere between tired and tense. This was a higher-risk clearance operation against an enemy that preferred bombs and ambushes to stand-up fights. Everybody knew it. Elena tapped one intersection near a village outlined in faint yellow. "Sir, this is the one I'm most concerned about," she continued. "We've had 2 IEDs on this stretch in the past month. This pattern of life suggests whoever's left in that village is either sympathetic or intimidated. If we take a mobility kill here, we trap the main body in a kill zone. I recommend the door banged open hard enough to make the map board tremble." Conversation died mid-syllable. Heads turned as a 2-star general walked in, his uniform crisp despite the dust, an aide and a small entourage trailing behind. The division commander. His presence changed the oxygen in the room. Everyone who had been leaning stood up a little straighter. A couple of junior officers subtly slid their phones away. A captain in the back quietly removed his cap suddenly. Aware of how small the TOC actually was with a general inside it, the general didn't ask permission to enter and didn't wait for anyone to recover from the interruption. He moved straight to the table, eyes scanning the map, then flicking to Elena, then to Harris. "Keep going, Major," he said, the tone implied. "Impress me." Elena didn't stiffen or stumble. She simply nodded. Double quotes. "Yes, sir. I was saying, based on recent IED pattern analysis, I recommend adjusting the main supply route 300 meters east here." She drew a parallel red line around the vulnerable choke point. "That gives us better fields of fire, a cleaner overwatch position, and a secondary egress if the lead platoon gets hit. We'd also pre-stage Kasevic assets just short of this phase line. With a dedicated route back to the general's hand, hit the table with a flat, explosive crack." Enough. Da-da! The sound snapped across the plywood walls and metal shelving. Pens froze. A radio operator paused mid-scribble. No one moved. He stared at her like she'd just insulted him. "I've read the plan," he said, voice rising. "What I approved was simple and aggressive. What you're doing is adding hesitation, adding complexity. We are not here to tiptoe around every possible what-if, Major. We are here to close with and destroy the enemy." Harris opened his mouth, thought better of it, and pressed his lips together instead. "Sir." "With respect," Elena replied, still at that same calm volume, "this isn't hesitation. It's redundancy. If we take a mobility kill here and can't maneuver, we risk he cut her off. This is combat, not a college seminar. His tone hardened, each word sharper than the last. I need leaders who are willing to commit, not hide behind extra arrows on a map. You've already added enough contingencies to this op order. Near the back, a young captain's lip curled into a smirk before he smoothed it away. A lieutenant glanced sideways at him, the expression, saying what they didn't dare voice aloud? Guess the rumors were right. Too cautious. Not built for this. The room tilted slightly away from Elena, socially, even if no one moved their feet. The general jabbed his finger at the alternate route she'd drawn. Erase that. We're not doing it. We're sticking to the original MSR, to the timeline I approved and to the plan I signed, and I don't want to hear any more about changing it. He straightened up, and then he delivered the line that would echo through the battalion long after that deployment was over. Frankly, Major Torres, you're not fit to lead combat troops if this is how you think. Silence dropped over the room. Someone cleared their throat. A chair creaked. The radio hissed softly in the awkward stillness. No one looked at her directly. Few stared at the map as if it were suddenly fascinating. Others looked at the general with a mix of fear, an admiration people reserve for powerful men who say out loud what they've been thinking in private. Elena didn't snap back. She didn't flinch, didn't rush to explain. Instead, she uncapped the marker again, wiped away the alternate line with one clean stroke, and traced the original route back in place. When she spoke, her voice was exactly as level as before. Understood. Sir, we'll proceed along Route Sabre as approved. Continuing with the scheme of maneuver, she moved on phase lines, timing, support by fire positions, ISR coverage. On the surface, the briefing was unchanged. But her jaw was set tighter now, the muscles moving when she swallowed a word or a breath. As she leaned over the map too, answer a question about fuel resupply. Her hand drifted up toward the collar of her blouse, thumb brushing the faint, pale scar that ran diagonally along her collarbone. She touched it once, as if making sure it was still there, then let her hand fall again. Most of the room didn't notice. Sergeant Major did. He watched quietly from the back, heavy. Squared shoulders, a face like carved stone that had seen more deployments than most of the officers combined. His eyes tracked the general, the map, the quiet major at the front. He gave nothing away. The briefing wrapped. Tasks were confirmed, timelines repeated. Any questions? Drew only a few cautious clarifications. When Harris dismissed them, chairs scraped and boots thudded as the cluster of officers and NCOs filed toward the door in the hallway outside. The murmuring started almost immediately. Guy's not wrong. One captain muttered, not bothering to hide the edge in his voice. Last thing we need is an ops major who's afraid to pull the trigger on a plan. Yeah, a lieutenant replied, keeping his voice low but not low enough. Heard she's all staff work anyway. Diversity pick. Never really led line troops. They passed Elena without pausing, without a nod. To them, she might as well have still been a name on a slide. The sergeant major hung back for a moment longer, watching her as she methodically capped the markers, stacked the overlays, and slid them back into a weathered map case. She looked up briefly, eyes meeting his across the room. Whatever passed between them was too small and too quick for anyone else to register a flicker of recognition, shared understanding. Then she looked away and went back to work. The general stepped out of the TOC, satisfied that his guidance had been made crystal clear. Engines in the motor pool were already being checked for one more time. Gunners were loading belts, locking turrets, tightening straps. They were about to drive straight into the route he insisted on, and in less than an hour. Every officer who had smirked, every soldier who had whispered, every person who'd written off Major Elena Torres as too cautious would learn just how wrong they were when the survival of the battalion rested on the plan she had just been ordered to erase. Outside the talk, the light hit different. The sun was dropping, throwing long shadows across the fob and turning the dust in the air into a golden haze. Generators hummed. A forklift beeped, backing up near a stack of ammo crates. Somewhere beyond the wire, a dull thud rolled over the landscape. Outgoing artillery, another unit shaping the battlefield. Elena walked alone across the gravel, her boots crunching with each step. Soldiers moved past her in both directions, teams carrying gear, mechanics heading back to the motor pool, MPs patrolling in pairs. Conversations dipped when she got close, words trimmed mid-sentence before picking back up behind her. She'd heard whispers her whole career. They never bothered her much until they started to echo things she'd already told herself as she walked. Fragments of those whispers seemed to hang in the air. Ops major, huh? Must be nice. Fast-tracked, I heard. Never seen her in a real firefight. Some general's pet project. None of the speakers were close enough to be seen clearly, but the tone was familiar. She'd been a woman in uniform. Long enough to recognize skepticism when she walked past it, she pushed open the door to a small side building that served as both offices and storage. Inside, the noise from outside dulled to a steady hum. She stepped into her cramped office, a metal desk. 2 folding chairs, a steel wall locker, a whiteboard already filled with timelines and acronyms. It wasn't much, but in a war zone, it counted as personal space. She shut the door gently and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her shoulders dropped half an inch. For a few seconds, the battalion operations officer was just Elena again. No rank, no map, no general. On her desk, the op order folder lay open. The route map she'd briefed earlier was clipped on top. She stared at the red line the general had ordered them to stick with. It cut right through the choke point that had set off every alarm in her mind. From the wall locker, she pulled out a second, smaller map overlay. This one wasn't official. It was hand-marked, edges frayed, corners soft from being folded and unfolded. The alternate route she'd suggested was drawn on it, along with a couple of other options no one had asked for. She laid both maps side by side. Most people in the battalion saw a cautious staff officer when they looked at her, someone who loved checklists and PowerPoints more than mud and cordite. What they didn't see were the streets of Sarder City or the alleys of Bakuba, burned into her memory so sharply she could have drawn them from recall even years later. Those streets came back now, uninvited. In her mind, the dusty fob blurred, and she was suddenly 26 again, a brand new platoon leader in 2005, crouched behind the shattered shell of a sedan while rounds snapped overhead. The air had smelled of hot metal and garbage. It's the kind of sweet rot that clung to dense city neighborhoods. Red one. This is red too. Her younger voice barked over the radio. We're pinned on the east side of the market. Building with the blue awning, 2nd floor. We need smoke and suppression on the rooftop at Grid. She could still feel the grit between her teeth when she grinned back then. Adrenaline drowning out fear. She'd thought experience would make the fear disappear. It didn't. It just taught you how to move through it without letting it own you. Another memory flashed back. 2007. Different city, same heat. Her platoon convoy creeping through a congested side street, forced there by a can't-miss route from brigade that looked perfect on satellite imagery and terrible on the ground. Local intel had warned them, quietly, that insurgents knew American routes better than some staff officers did. But the brigade plan was non-negotiable. She'd argued once already that day and been told to execute the plan, Lieutenant. So, she executed it. She could still see Specialist Moran standing in the turret of the lead Humvee, laughing about something when the blast hit. She remembered the world turning white-orange, the sound smashing into her chest like a physical blow, the vehicle tilting in slow motion, then the training taking over, yelling orders, returning fire, pulling a radio from a dead RTO's chest rig because theirs had gone silent. The ambush had been textbook. I'd then contact from multiple directions, then attempts to drag them deeper into the maze of streets. She'd gotten most of her people out, called in support, fought them to a standstill. Most of her people, too, hadn't come back. Later, there had been an after-action review that used phrases like unfortunate but acceptable risk. And in line with expected casualty projections, somewhere in a headquarter building far from the street where it happened, someone called the brigade route reasonable. She had never heard it that way. Back in her office on the FOB in 2017, her fingers rested quietly on the edge of the smaller overlay. The memory of that alley in Bakuba never stayed buried for long when she looked at a map with a choke point someone else insisted was good enough. The Army had given her 2 small ribbons for that day, Valor Awards. Kept them in a plain envelope at the bottom of her wall locker, not pinned on her uniform. To some, they were proof she was exactly the kind of aggressive leader the general said he wanted. To her, they were a reminder that aggression without ground truth kills people. She closed her eyes for a second and heard fragments of present day. Rumors again, probably got those medals because they needed a woman to pin something on. She's just here to check a box. Never even seen a real firefight. She had 100 opportunities to correct the record and never took one. Explaining her past meant reliving it, and she'd already done that enough at 0200, staring at a plywood ceiling. Instead of defending her reputation, she defended her plans. She leaned over the desk, picked up a pen, and circled the choke point again on the unofficial overlay. Next to it, she drew an X marking where a quick reaction force could stage. Line of hash marks indicated a field where artillery could reach with acceptable collateral risk. Along the alternate route, she added small notations call signs, timing, fire support options, things no one had asked her to prep, but that she knew she'd need if they're wrong again. Her door opened without a knock. Captain Reese, one of the staff officers, peeked in. "Ma'am, ROC drills." "In 20, he said. "General wants everyone at the terrain model." "I'll be there," she answered, glancing at the clock. He hesitated, eyes dropping to the second map on her desk. You, still working on the alternate?" Her face didn't change. "I'm making sure I understand the ground, Captain. That's all." He nodded, not sure if that was allowed or not, and left. Alone again, Elena folded the smaller overlay carefully, tucking it into a plastic sleeve already lined with grease pencil marks. She slid it into her map case, separate from the official op order. If today went well, no one would ever see it if it didn't. It might be the only thing standing between the battalion and a repeat of Bakuba. She took one more look at the red lines slicing through the vulnerable intersection, then closed the folder and headed for the ROC drill. Walking back out into a fob, filled with people who thought they had her figured out, the motor pool was alive with the particular chaos that comes a few hours before a major operation. Engines were running at idle, the smell of diesel mixing with hot metal and dust. Mechanics crawled under armored trucks, last-minute adjustments echoing against steel. Gunners checked traverse and elevation on turrets, swinging machine guns in slow arcs over the gravel. The battalion's vehicles, MRAPs, Humvees, and a couple of up-armored logistics trucks were lined up in rough order of march. Spray-painted call signs and chalkboard notes on windshields gave the whole place a sense of improvised order. The general moved through it like an inspector, his entourage orbiting around him. He stopped at random vehicles, pointing out smudged glass here, a loose strap there, an improperly secured antenna somewhere else. None of those things really mattered for the upcoming fight, but they reinforced the message. He was watching, and his word was law. Company commanders hovered at the edges of his path, ready to answer whatever he threw at them. Most of them had been in the talk for the earlier dressing down. They'd heard him call the operations officer not fit to lead combat troops. The phrase lingered in the air like smoke. Near one row of MRAPs, a small group of officers huddled. Over a printed copy of the op order, Captain Hines, whose platoons would be near the front of the column, jabbed at the map with a pen. "Look, I get what she was saying," he told the others. "But we've been working this plan for weeks. You start changing routes now, you throw everybody off." Captain Yates snorted. Or maybe she just likes changing plans to feel important. A couple of lieutenants laughed lightly, glancing around to make sure no senior NCOs were within earshot. "You hear what the general said?" Yates went on, enjoying himself now. "It's not fit to lead combat troops. That's who." He shook his head. "Bet that stung." "What?" "Yeah, but he's not wrong," one of the lieutenants added. "She's a staff officer, spends more time with Excel than with soldiers. I checked she's got, one line company tour years ago? Rest is schools and headquarters? None of them had actually checked. The one-line company tour detail had materialized out of thin air sometime in the last week and been repeated enough to sound like fact. Across the motor pool, a pair of privates sat on the back ramp of a vehicle, helmets off, chugging water. "That her?" one asked, nodding toward Elena as she walked past with her map case tucked under her arm. "The Major?" The other smirked. "Apparently she's the reason we've got twice as many PowerPoints as missions this deployment." I snickered. The joke wasn't particularly good, but it fit the narrative taking shape in the barracks, the idea that she was all caution and no courage. While they laughed, Elena kept walking. She knew the rumors were there. Every unit had them, and they always found targets who didn't fit someone's idea of what a real leader looked like. A woman in her late 30s who didn't brag about her deployments and didn't flirt with anyone was an easy mark. She reached the large tent where the rehearsal of concept drill was already set up. Outside, a rough terrain model had been carved into the dirt with engineer tape marking roads and buildings. Small wooden blocks with unit call signs stood in for companies and platoons. Spray-painted arrows and chalk lines traced imagined movement across real earth. Figures gathered around at Harris. The general, the battalion staff, company commanders, key platoon leaders, the sergeant major. Elena stepped into the circle, took her place near the model's edge, and opened her map case. The ROC drill began. One by one, unit leaders walked through their roles in the mission: who moved first, who provided overwatch, who secured key intersections. Voices overlapped occasionally, but the tone stayed professional, rehearsed. When her turn came, Elena stepped forward and moved a block representing Bravo Company toward the choke point near. "The village, sir," she began, addressing Harris, but projecting for the group. "As Bravo approaches the intersection, this is where we're most vulnerable. We've had multiple IEDs in this vicinity. Pattern of life and SIGINT both suggest a voice cut in before she finished, Major." "We already went over this," said Lieutenant Colonel Stein, a senior staff officer attached to the general's entourage. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You trying to relitigate the plan we briefed an hour ago?" There was a ripple of restrained laughter around the terrain model. Elena kept her voice even. "I'm not relitigating anything, sir. I'm highlighting risk. If we're hit here, our options are limited. If we stage a quick reaction element..." Stein raised a hand, stopping her like a student in a classroom. "You see what I mean?" he said, turning casually toward the general, inviting him in on the joke. "Every time we talk about this op, there's another contingency, another what if. At some point, we've got to stop decorating the map and actually go do the mission." Someone snorted. A few smiled openly now, their earlier caution eroded by the fact that a lieutenant colonel was leading the mocking. Even criticizing a major felt safe if you were echoing the general's tone. The general chuckled once, not quite kindly. "Going with the simpler plan, Major. We are not going to engineer out every risk. War doesn't work that way." Lena looked back at the terrain model. She could see it. Vehicles bunched up at the intersection, no room to maneuver, buildings close enough to throw grenades from. She could almost feel the old sensation of heat on her face and dust in her mouth when an explosion lifted the ground. Double quotes. "Yes, sir," she said. "Understood." She stepped back from the model. The ROC drill continued, but the echo of the exchange traveled. When it ended and officers drifted back toward their units, the story had already grown. "Did you hear Stein?" "Shut her down." "Yeah." She tried to re-argue the route again. "Some people just don't get it. We're here to fight, not play chess." On the far side of the tent, the battalion sergeant major caught up with First Sergeant Cole from Bravo Company, a man with lines around his eyes and salt in his hair. "You ever worked with Torres before?" the sergeant major asked, keeping his voice low. Cole nodded slowly. "Long time ago. Bakuba."
No.
The sergeant major's eyes narrowed just a bit. "That alley?" "Yeah," Cole replied. "That alley." They didn't need to say more. The details were understood between men who'd been there or near enough to know the story. An alley that had nearly become a graveyard. A lieutenant who'd kept her people moving when everything went sideways. Reinforcements that had arrived because someone on the ground refused to accept acceptable loss as an answer. "You tell anyone?" Sergeant Major asked, glancing toward the younger officers laughing near the vehicles. Cole shook his head. "She doesn't talk about it." "I'm not going to tell war stories for her, Sergeant Major. That's her call." The Sergeant Major grunted, satisfied. Respect didn't always mean stepping in. Sometimes it meant letting someone carry their own past the way they wanted to. On her way back to the talk, Elena walked past a group of soldiers doing radio checks. Valkyrie 3. "This is Battalion, radio check." Over, a voice called on the net. The RTO looked up as her call sign came through. "Ma'am, that's you," he said. Elena took the handset. "Battalion, this is Valkyrie 3. Read you 5 by 5. Over." "Copy, Valkyrie 3. Net is green. Out." She handed the handset back. The call sign didn't mean much to the young specialist. To him, it was just another label in a sea of labels. To a small handful of people scattered across Iraq, though, it meant something else entirely, a ghost from an older fight. Back in the talk, the final version of the op order was printed and bound. The general signed off on it with a flourish. The main supply route remained exactly where he wanted it. Cutting tight through the village, Elena had circled 3 times on her unofficial overlay. "What's our timeline?" he asked. "SP at 500, Harris said. "Sunrise plus 45, good." The general nodded. "We'll be at the objective before the VIPs even land in theater. That's how you run an operation, ladies and gentlemen." Photo ops and progress reports, Elena thought. She kept the words to herself. She stood in the back as Harris briefed the companies one last time over the radio. While he talked, she opened her map case, pulling out the folded overlay. With a small pencil, she added one final note near the village, a grid coordinate and a name gunfighter. Not on any official diagram, not on any slide. Anyone asked, she'd call it contingency planning. Say it quietly and hope no one made fun of that too, in a few hours. The battalion would be wheels rolling on a dangerous, rigid plan designed to look bold on paper. And somewhere beneath that, in her head, and on that unofficial overlay, a different plan waited, quieter, more flexible. Designed not to impress anyone, but to keep as many names as possible off a casualty list. Dawn came without color, just a gradual lightening of the sky from black to gray to a harsh, washed-out blue. The kind of morning where everything felt both too quiet and too loud. Engines turned over across the fob, emitting deep, throaty rumbles. Headlights cut through dust as vehicles formed into column. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, the support elements. The maintenance trucks. Gunners stood in open hatches, silhouettes against the growing light, hands resting on grips. Out. Fingers carefully outside triggers, inside the TOC. The drone feed glowed on the main screen, a high, overhead view of the region. The town they were headed toward looked almost peaceful from altitude, clusters of square buildings. Narrow streets, a few old vehicles parked haphazardly along the main road. No one watching from that height could feel the tension in those. Allie's Elena stood at the console nearest the map, headset on, one earpiece off so she could hear both the radio and the room. The general stood a few feet away, arms folded, gaze fixed on the screens. Harris moved between them and the fire cell, checking timelines and confirmation briefs. "Battalion, this is Alpha 6, came the voice over the net. "Crossing. SP now, column moving." "Copy, Alpha 6. Harris replied. "You are green. Proceed along route Saber as briefed." The convoy rolled. Icons on the digital map inched along the red line. The atmosphere in the talk was tense, but confident. Everyone knew it was a high-risk mission, but they also knew they had overwhelming firepower, air support, and the element of surprise, at least. That's what the PowerPoints had said. 20 minutes into the movement, the drone operator cleared his throat. "Sir, you're going to want to see this," he said, zooming the feed in on the village near the choke point. "We're seeing some unusual movement." On the screen, tiny figures moved quickly along side streets. A pair of cars that had been parked 4 hours suddenly pulled into alleyways. A group of people on a rooftop appeared, then disappeared just as quickly. The operator nervously tapped his finger against the monitor's frame. "That's new traffic," he said. We didn't see that pattern during the last 3 days of collection. Elena stepped closer, eyes narrowing. How close is Alpha to that intersection? She asked. About 8 minutes out at current speed, came the reply from the battle captain. She watched the drone feed quietly. Civilians didn't normally sprint across open rooftops at sunrise without a reason. Vehicles didn't reposition like that unless someone told them to. Sir, she said. Turning slightly toward the general, this is exactly what we talked about. Movement into covered positions, vehicles shifting into side streets. We should adjust the route now, before they hit the choke point. Push a platoon to overwatch on the east side. Bring Bravo up to the general, waved a dismissive hand without taking his eyes off the screen. We are sticking to the plan. Major, he said, this is exactly why I didn't want to overcomplicate things. Every time there's a blip on a radar, you want to rewrite the op order. This isn't a blip, Elena replied, a slight edge finally creeping into her tone. This is set-up behavior. If we push straight through that intersection without softening it or rerouting, we are walking into enough, he snapped. We're not rerouting an entire battalion because the pattern changed a little. We have air on call QRF and fires, they hit us, we hit them harder. That's the job. Stay on Saber. Harris looked between them. He knew better than to publicly contradict his division commander, but he also trusted Elena's instincts. The hesitation lasted only a second, but in war, second is enough to notice. Battle main to all elements, he said finally into the mic. Continue as planned. Maintain current route. Report any contact immediately. Elena stared at the screen, jaw tight. She could feel Bakaba lurking at the edges of her memory like a ghost. Different map, same arrogance somewhere else, some other time. Someone dismissing the ground truth because the plan looked clean in a briefing. The convoy drew closer. On the drone feed, pickup truck suddenly backed out of an alley and parked. Facing the road, nose pointed like a waiting dog. A shadowy figure moved in the truck bed. Sir, the drone operator said again, more urgent now. That's not normal either. The general's patience thinned. We know it's not normal, he said. They're not idiots. But we're ready for it. Stay focused. The talk felt like it inhaled and forgot how to exhale. Then the world blew sideways. The first explosion ripped into the lead MRAP just as it crossed the intersection. Even through the feed's muted audio, the shock registered a sudden bloom of dust and flame, the vehicle jolting upward and sideways. The drone camera shook, then stabilized, zooming in as the column behind began to compress. Contact. Contact. Alpha's taking effective fire. A voice screamed over the net. At this. Is Alpha 2, we have a vehicle disabled. Possible casualties, machine gun fire erupted from the buildings lining the street. From the drone's point of view, tiny muzzle flashes stitched along windows and rooftops, forming a lethal bracket around the trapped vehicles. An RPG trail streaked across the frame, impacting near the second vehicle in line. Alpha 1 is. Buttoned up, returning fire, came another shout. We are in the kill zone. Repeat, we are in the kill zone. The talk exploded into motion. Radios that had been idle suddenly came alive, multiple voices stepping on each other. Staff officers leaned over screens, trying to track icons as the neatly arranged symbols on the digital map jerked and bunched. Get them moving. Tell them to push through. The general barked. They sit there. They die there. They know. This Alpha 6? This is Battle Main, Harris said into his handset, trying to stay calm. You must push through the intersection. Do not stop in the kill zone. Over. Static washed back at him, followed by fragmented responses. Disabled gunners hit, we can't move. We're blocked. Then another voice cut through, higher, strained. This is Alpha 3, dismounting. We're trying to clear the lead vehicle, taking fire from multiple directions. On the drone feed, figures poured out of doorways onto rooftops. Some fired down into the convoy. Others moved quickly down alleys, anticipating the battalion's possible reactions. This wasn't random. It was a well-planned, complex ambush. Elena's fingers tightened around the edge of the map table. Her eyes darted between the drone feed, the digital map, and the printed overlay she had prepared. She saw the same pattern she'd seen a decade earlier in Bakuba, unfolding almost frame by frame. "Bravo is 10 minutes out," the battle captain said, voice tight. "Charlie's another 5 behind that. The support trucks are still leaving the FOB. Tell Bravo to accelerate and flank," the general ordered. "Get them through that village fast, and hit whatever's shooting at Alpha from the side streets. And get fires on those rooftops." "Sir, if Bravo pushes into that same intersection while Alpha's still stuck," Elena started. "We don't have time for theories," the general snapped. His face was red now, the veins in his temples visible. "They will execute their plan." He grabbed a different handset to talk directly to Bravo's commander, cutting across Harris's net. "Bravo 6, this is Viper 6. Do not slow down. You will push through that village and relieve Alpha. That is a direct order." Harris lowered his own radio slightly, frustration flickering across his face. He knew his battalion better than anyone. He knew how quickly things could go from bad to catastrophic when multiple companies started following conflicting guidance under fire. "Sir," said carefully to the general, "we need a single voice on the net. Let my S3 deconflict movement and fires, or we're going to?" The general ignored him, his eyes glued to the feed. On the screen, something new appeared. A white boxy vehicle, accelerating hard from behind a building, kicking up dust as it barreled toward the middle of the convoy. It was moving fast and straight, ignoring cover and fire. The drone operator's voice cracked. "Sir, we've got a possible VBIED vehicle bomb in the main route. It's heading right for the center of the column." The talk lurched further into chaos. Voices collided. Calls for medics. Reports of blocked lanes. Requests for fire missions. Panicked warnings about the incoming vehicle. Harris tried to track it all, but the inputs were too many. Every screen showed some new emergency. Every radio frequency carried bad news. The route they'd insisted on was doing exactly what Elena had warned it would. It had turned the battalion into a trapped, staggered line of steel with nowhere to go. She looked down at the unofficial overlay in her hands. The alternate route she'd drawn bypassed the intersection, looped around to higher ground, and used a series of side streets to establish overwatch positions. It wasn't perfect. Nothing in Iraq ever was. But it was movement, flexibility, options. Right now, they had none, Elena Harris said, low enough that only she could hear. "What do you have?" She met his eyes. The rank on her chest said Major. The memory behind her eyes carried every stripe of experience she'd earned since. She'd been a lieutenant crawling through broken glass in someone else's bad plan. "We need to break contact and reroute," she said. "Now, before Bravo drives into the same trap." The general spun toward her, anger flaring. "You are not going to use this as an excuse to prove your point," he said. We hit them hard. That's how you win this fight." "What?" Second explosion hit before he finished speaking. This time, it was a support vehicle in the center of the column, just behind Alpha's trailing elements. The blast tore through the road, throwing debris into the air and turning another vehicle into a twisted obstacle. On the drone feed, the red line of the route was now bracketed by 2 points of impact front and rear. "Battle main. This is Charlie 6!" came a panicked voice over the radio. "The route behind Alpha and Bravo is blocked. We've got no clear path forward or back. We're fixed in the kill zone." The room fell into a moment of stunned silence. In that silence, Lena stepped forward. "Sir," she said, and this time her voice cut through the noise like a blade. "You're about to lose 2 companies and a support element if we don't change the plan. Right now." The general rounded on her again. "This is not your call." Harris held up a hand. Not to the general, but to the room. "Everyone quiet," he said, surprisingly firm. His eyes locked on Elena. "Major Torres, if you've got something, now's the time." She dropped the unofficial overlay onto the main map, smoothing it with one hand. "We pull Bravo short of the intersection and divert them 1 block east," she said quickly, tracing the movement across the map. "There's a parallel street they can punch through to get around the kill zone. We use that to establish a support biofire position on these rooftops here and here." 8. She tapped the building she'd marked the night before. "At the same time, we send the QRF along this back route," She pointed to another narrow street to hit the ambusher's flank. We get artillery on this open field where they're staging reinforcements. She looked up at the fires. Cell, you have that grid? She asked. The fire's NCO blinked, then leaned in. The grid was already scribbled on her overlay with a circle around it. Yeah, ma'am, he said. We can range that. Collateral's low. She turned back too. The general double quotes, sir. You wanted aggressive, she said. This is aggressive. It's just not reckless. But we need to act now, before that VBIED reaches the center of the column. On the screen, the white vehicle was getting closer, weaving through scattered wreckage and small arms fire, accelerating. When it could, the general looked at the feed, then at the map, then at Harris. The room waited. The choice wasn't between caution and courage anymore. It was between control and catastrophe. Finally, he exhaled, a sharp, angry sound. Fine. You think you can untangle this? He said, jabbing a finger at Elena. Then untangle it. You've got the battalion net. Don't lose it. Harris didn't hesitate. Valkyrie 3. This is Battle 6, he said, passing her the primary handset. You are controlling movement. And fires, all stations will follow your instructions. Over. Elena took the radio. The metal felt solid and familiar in her hand. This is Valkyrie 3, she said into the mic, her voice suddenly steady in a way that reminded a few old hands of stories they'd heard years ago. All stations, listen carefully. Alpha Bravo. Charlie, stand by for new tasking. She started talking. Her orders came fast, specific, and grounded in the exact terrain she'd studied. Bravo 6, break off before the intersection. Do not enter the kill zone. Say again, do not enter the kill zone. Turn east at the next side street. You will move to grid, she rattled off coordinates and established support by fire facing west. I want guns on those rooftops. Prioritize positions engaging Alpha's front and right flank. Copy, Valkyrie 3, came Bravo's reply, the earlier bravado stripped away. Breaking off now, turning east. Out, QRF-1. This is Valkyrie 3. You will move along Route Tango. She traced another line on the map, through the back alleys. You're going to come up on the enemy's right flank. Do not silhouette against rooftops. Use the alleys. You'll have fire support on call once you're in position. Roger, Valkyrie 3, the QRF leader replied, moving Tango now. She switched nets with a flick of a dial. Fire support, this is Valkyrie 3. Prepare fire mission on grid. She gave the coordinates for the open field she'd circled the night before. Heat quick. Danger close. Friendlies are within 200 meters. Confirm you're comfortable with that. The fires officer swallowed. If you're sure about the grid, ma'am, we can do it. I'm sure, she said. Target is enemy staging area. They're feeding fighters into the kill zone. We cut off the feed. We give Alpha breathing room. Roger, shot in 30 seconds. While the fire cell worked, Elena reached for a different handset connected to a less used encrypted net. The label on the console read Joint SOF. Stay focused. She hesitated only long enough to feel the weight of what she was about to do. Some connections you didn't use lightly. Gunfighter 1. This is Valkyrie 3 on secure, she said into the handset. Using a call sign most people in the room had never heard before. If you're still monitoring this net, we could use a hand. There was a pause. Then a voice came back, dry and surprised, with a hint of a grin buried under the static. Valkyrie 3, the speaker said. Last time I heard that call sign, it had actual attached. This is Gunfighter 1. Go ahead. A few heads in the talk turned at the exchange. The sergeant major's eyes sharpened. Stein frowned, realizing there were pieces on the board he hadn't known existed. Elena didn't. Explain. There was no time. We're engaged at the village along Sabre, she said. Alpha is fixed in a complex ambush. Bravo is maneuvering for Overwatch. Request immediate support from your gun trucks and Overwatch element. I've got a field I can drop steel on to cover your approach. Copy all, Gunfighter 1 replied. We're 3 clicks south, mounted and loose. Send us your target and friendlies. We'll deconflict on the move. She gave him the grid references, then snapped back to the battalion net. On the screen, Bravo's icons were peeling off the main road, moving east into the side streets she'd identified. Alpha was still pinned, but some of the enemy fire was shifting, uncertain about the new movement. The VBIED was closer now, trying to snake its way through the wreckage. Javelin Team Bravo 3, this is Valkyrie 3, Elena said. Confirm. You're still in the center of the column. There was a brief pause, then a breathless voice answered. Valkyrie 3, this is Javelin 3. We're in the middle, ma'am. We were told to bring the system even though some people thought it was overkill. I know, she cut in. Listen carefully. You will engage that white truck now. Range and fire. You'll not wait for permission from anyone else on this net. You have it from me. Yes, ma'am, the gunner replied, adrenaline and relief mixed in his tone. Target acquired. Firing. On the drone feed, a flare of light shot from the top of a vehicle toward the inbound truck. Half a second later, the truck vanished in a ball of fire and fragments. A shockwave rippled through the street, adding another layer of smoke to the already chaotic scene. Vehicle bomb neutralized, the drone operator said quietly, almost reverently. Artillery rounds slammed into the open field beyond the village. Geysers of dirt and concrete erupting as the enemy's staging area was pounded. Figures who had been moving toward the fight suddenly turned away or disappeared. Altogether, Bravo's lead elements reached their overwatch positions, setting up machine guns and marksmen on rooftops, pouring fire into the firing points that had trapped Alpha. The QRF's icons inched through back alleys and flared as they opened up on enemy positions from the flank, catching fighters in crossfire. Slowly, the chaos began to organize. Alpha 6, this is Valkyrie 3, Elena said. Status. There was a long moment of static. Then a voice came back, gragged but steady. Valkyrie 3, Alpha 6. We've got 2 vehicles disabled, multiple wounded, but we're moving casualties to cover. Enemy fire is decreasing on our front. Breaking contact, shifting south, like you directed. Your plan's working? We're still in the fight. The words washed through the talk, cutting through the leftover panic. Elena exhaled once, a short, controlled breath. Copy Alpha 6. Keep moving. Bravo and QRF have your flanks. Kosovac route is being cleared now. The general said nothing. His eyes were locked on the screens, watching as his simple and aggressive plan was replaced on the fly by the very contingencies he'd dismissed. The battalion was bleeding, but it was alive and maneuvering because the woman he'd called not fit to lead had just taken command of the chaos and bent it toward survival. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. There would be more contact, more minor ambushes on the edges of the town. But the decisive moment, the one that could have turned this mission into a name's annual, catastrophe had passed, and it had passed because one quiet major refused to let history repeat itself. The firefight tapered off over the next 40 minutes. It's not with a dramatic last stand, but with the messy, grinding reality of modern combat. Sporadic shots, a couple of sporadic RPGs, small pockets of resistance cleared one by one. Dismounts swept through alleys under covering fire. Engineers marked and bypassed another IED that hadn't detonated. Kosevic birds came in low and fast. Rotors chopping dust into angry halos as they lifted the worst casualties toward the rear. Inside the talk, the noise slowly dialed back from frantic to focused. The drone feed still showed smoke curling up from the intersection. The charred remains of the VBIED and a jagged pattern of blackened craters marking where artillery had walked across the enemy's staging area. But friendly icons were no longer. Pinned in place, were moving. Alive. Elena stayed on the net, her headset slightly askew, one earpiece still off. Her voice never rose, but it never softened either. She passed updates, coordinated logistics, and checked on casualty counts with the same steady tone she'd used hours earlier when she'd been talking about IED statistics. Bravo 6. Shift your support by fire to cover Alpha Southern. Movement. Charlie 6, you are clear to move up and secure the intersection now that the VBIED threat is neutralized. Engineers will mark remaining hazards. QRF 1, hold your current position for 5 more mics. Once Alpha is clear, you'll collapse back along Route Tango and rejoin the main body. Piece by piece, the battalion untangled itself from the trap it, had driven into when the last report came in that all elements were either secure or moving toward the objective along the alternate route. Elena finally took a step back from the map table. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. The room, which had been orbiting around her words and the two screens, seemed to realize all at once that the immediate crisis had passed. The general remained, standing near the center of the talk. His arms were no longer folded. They hung loosely. At his sides, hands empty. He looked at the map. At the red line of the original route, now partially crossed out and overwritten in grease, pencil with the curves and angles of Elena's improvised plan. Then his gaze settled on her. Casualty count. He asked quietly. Harris answered. 3 kiosks, sir. 9 wounded evacuated. 2 vehicles combat loss. 3 damaged but recoverable. The numbers were heavy. For anyone who'd ever written letters to families, 3 would never feel acceptable. But everyone in the room understood what the count could have been if the VBIED had reached the middle of the column. If the ambush had stayed uncontested, if the battalion had tried to push straight through with no options, the general knew it too. Before he could speak again, the door at the back opened, and a man in dusty plate carrier and headset stepped in, pulling off his helmet as he crossed to the main console. He was older than most of the line officers, with streaks of gray in his beard and sleeves pushed up, to reveal tanned forearms. Subdued patch on his kit marked him as part of the Special Operations Detachment that had provided the flanking support. "Division talk?" he asked, looking around briefly. His eyes landed on Elena. "Valkyrie 3? Nodded. "Yes, Captain." The man smiled faintly, tired but genuine. "Ma'am," he said, loud enough for everyone near the map to hear. "Last time I heard that call sign it was Valkyrie Actual. Bakuba, 2007. His gaze sharpened. "Didn't know you were." "Back in country." The words hung in the air. Several heads snapped toward Elena. The younger officers, who'd been trading jokes about her never seeing real combat, looked suddenly unsure of themselves. The sergeant major's eyes went unreadable again. But there was the slightest hint of recognition in them. Like a puzzle piece had clicked into place. The general's expression shifted. He wasn't a man who knew every story from every fight. But there were some operations that stuck in the collective memory of a division. The Bakuba incident had been one of them, a joint patrol caught in an alley, ambushed from multiple directions, nearly wiped out until a young lieutenant on the ground had coordinated air, armor, and infantry in a way that ended up in an after-action. Report passed around at field grade. Levels as an example of leadership under fire. The lieutenant in those pages had been calcined Valkyrie Actual. "Bakuba," the general repeated slowly, looking at Elena with a new kind of scrutiny. "That was, it's the alley with the blocked egress." "Yes, sir," the SOF captain said. "That alley. We were the supporting element, thought we were. Rolling in to pick up bodies and weapons. Instead, we found a lieutenant standing on a busted engine block, still directing fires. Name on the radio was Valkyrie Actual." He nodded. Toward Elena again. Same voice. For a moment, the talk seemed to tilt. It wasn't the kind of dramatic, cinematic pause you see in movies. It was quieter than that. Few people blinked. Someone in the back muttered something under their breath, it sounded. Suspiciously like a curse of surprise. The general's jaw worked as he put it together. "I read that AIR," he said slowly. "Years ago. It's still used at the staff college." He looked at Elena. "You were that lieutenant." Elena didn't look triumphant. She didn't puff up her chest or lean into the attention. She just met his eyes, steady and tired. Double quotes, "Yes." "Sir," she said, "it's in my record." "I didn't see that in the summary I was given," he said, more to himself than to her. "It's on page 3. She replied without any trace of sarcasm. Most people don't read that far. Something like embarrassment flickered across his face, not because he'd missed a line in a file, but because he'd publicly humiliated someone he now knew had survived worse decisions than his, and still chosen to serve. He looked down at the map again, tracing the modified route with his eyes. "You were the one who insisted on the alternate route," he said quietly. "Yes, sir. You drew up the contingency for a blocked intersection." "Yes, sir." You placed that javelin team in the middle of the column. Yes, sir. The SOF captain gave a small huff of amusement. And she gave us the grid on that staging. Area 2, he added. Saved us from driving straight into an IED belt of our own. Whoever told you she was not fit to lead combat troops didn't know what they were talking about? No one laughed now, Stein the lieutenant colonel. HUD mocked her at the ROC drill, stood a little farther back than before, his mouth a tight line. He didn't meet her eyes. The general looked around the room, then back at Elena. When he spoke, his voice carried not the booming performance from earlier, but something controlled and deliberate. Major Torres, he said, I was wrong. The words were simple. In a culture built on rank and certainty, they might as well have been fireworks. He didn't qualify them. Didn't soften them with excuses about incomplete information or miscommunication. He just said them. I dismissed your concerns, he continued. I dismissed your experience. And today, your planning and your decisions saved this battalion from a far worse outcome. That's a fact. He looked at Harris. From this point forward, all movement for this operation goes through your S3, he said. If she says a route is bad, it's bad. If she says we need an alternate, we get one. Understood? Yes, sir, Harris replied. Without hesitation, the general turned back to the rest of the staff. If any of you, he said, eyes passing briefly over Stein, had doubts about Major Torres' ability to lead in combat, put them away. She's earned the right to be listened to today and every day after. He didn't make a production of it. There was no medal pinned, no ceremony, just a plain acknowledgement spoken in the same room where he'd humiliated her an hour before, too. The men and women watching, it landed harder than any formal award. Elena didn't smile. She gave a small nod, same one she might give in a regular briefing when someone acknowledged a point she'd made. Thank you, sir, she said.
Ow.
If we want to make the objective before dark, we'll need to resequence the support elements. She picked up a marker and went back to the map, redrawing movement arrows with the same focus she'd had before the first explosion. The difference now was in the room, not in her. People leaned in when she spoke. When she directed a company to shift its sector, there were no eye rolls, no smirks, no whispered jokes about overcomplicating things. Questions came, but they were real questions, not challenges. The sergeant major watched, arms folded, an almost imperceptible satisfaction in his eyes. He hadn't needed a dramatic reveal to know who she was. He'd seen it the moment she steadied her hand on the map, while a general tried to knock it loose. Now everyone else saw it too. The general moved aside. No longer at the center of the talk, he stood slightly behind and to the side of Elena, as she talked on the net, listening to her decisions instead of overriding them. When she paused to confirm a detail with the fire cell, he checked casualty updates, not her math. The power dynamic in the room had flipped, not with a shout, but with competence under fire and the ugly clarity of almost losing far too many people. Outside, the battalion pushed on, battered but still in the fight. Moving along a route that had not existed on any official slide that morning, and now meant the difference between a bad day and a nightmare written into history. By the time the last vehicle rolled back through the FOB gate, the sun was dipping low again. The day had stretched into something elastic and exhausting, the kind of day where time moved both too fast during the crisis and too slow during the cleanup. The battalion was bruised. 3 soldiers were not coming home. 9 more were in surgery, or bandaged and medicated, some sitting in quiet corners of the aid station, others already on flights to higher-level care. 2 vehicles were write-offs. Blackened hulks that would later be cannibalized for parts. It could have been so much worse. In the talk, the map still bore scars of its own smudged markings, hastily drawn arrows, circles around the blast sites, and the field that had taken the brunt of their artillery. The air smelled faintly of sweat, dust, and stale coffee. Elena stood alone at the table, updating the final status board. She wrote the names of the fallen in neat block letters in a notebook only she could see, pausing briefly after each one.
Ow.
She didn't say them out loud. She never did, not until the memorial. Voices drifted outside her office later that night. People passed in the hallway, heading for sleep. Ciao. Or the kind of late-night conversations that always followed a heavy day in the field. Something had shifted. When she walked into the next coordination meeting, chairs were pulled out for her without ceremony. Company commanders who had previously kept their questions curt and transactional now asked her opinion on routes, on staging, on timing. Lieutenants who had once whispered about her never seeing real firefights now listened carefully when she pointed at a map. No one suddenly started treating her like a superhero. Nobody built a shrine to her in the battalion area. This wasn't a movie. People still grumbled about the mission, still argued over details, still swore when ammo counts came in lower than they wanted, but the smirks were gone. The casual jokes about not fit to lead disappeared as if they'd never been spoken, though she remembered each one. The laughter at her expense in the motor pool was replaced by a different kind of silence when she walked by the quiet you give someone whose words have proven they can reach farther than any rank. 2 days after the mission, the general returned to the FOB for a brief follow-up visit. He asked for Elena. They met in her small office, the same cramped space where she'd laid out her unofficial overlay before the operation. The door was closed. No staff, no entourage. It's just a lieutenant colonel battalion commander, a major, and a 2-star who looked more tired than he had the first time he'd walked into the talk. He stood for a moment, looking at the maps pinned to her walls, the official route, the alternate overlays, the list of logistics requirements. Then he looked at her. What I said in the talk the other day, he began, about you not being fit to lead combat troops. That was wrong. He didn't dress it up, didn't add the word maybe, or at the time. I let my bias toward a simple plan and my impatience for debate get in the way of listening to someone who knew what they were talking about. He went on. You weren't being timid. You were seeing second and third order effects I didn't want to think about. That's on me. Elena stood at parade rest, hands clasped behind her back. Sir, we all. He shook his head. No, this one's mine. I'm not asking you to pretend it didn't happen. I'm just telling you I'm not going to forget it. He paused. You're more fit to lead than I was that morning, he said. That's the truth. She didn't quite know what to do with that. Compliments weren't a currency she traded in easily, especially not from people who outranked her, but she recognized sincerity when she heard it. Thank you. Sir, she said quietly. Before he left, a battalion formation in the dusty open area near the motor pool, the general stepped up to speak. He didn't make a grand show of names and stories. He talked about the mission, the enemy, the losses. Then he did something unusual. The reason this battalion is standing here with fewer empty ranks than we might have had, he said, is because your operations officer knew what she was doing. She planned for the worst and executed when it came. Remember that when you think about who you listen to in a briefing? Sometimes the voice you dismiss is the one that will save your life. It didn't say her name. He didn't need to. Every pair of eyes that turned toward the staff formation found Major Torres. After the formation, people didn't rush over to shake her hand. They had rifles to clean, vehicles to prep, reports to write. Life in a war zone rarely paused for reflection, even when it deserved to. But as soldiers moved past her on their way back to work, a few small things happened. A young lieutenant who had once laughed at Stein's jokes about overcomplicating things stopped and said, "Ma'am, I was wrong." Then he walked on, face red, ears burning. First Sergeant Cole gave her a single nod, a nod of surprise, but of acknowledgement. They'd both been in that alley once, metabolizing other people's bad choices. Some bonds didn't need words. Later, near the talk entrance, a private she vaguely recognized from the motor pool approached her. He looked barely old enough, too. Shave helmet under his arm, eyes nervous. "Ma'am," said. She turned toward him. "Yeah, private," he snapped to attention. Posture suddenly razor sharp. "I just wanted to say," he managed. "I heard some stuff about you before the mission. Jokes, and I believed them. I shouldn't have. My squad leader said if it wasn't for your plan, our truck wouldn't have made it out today." He swallowed. "So, thank you, and I hope I get to serve under you again." Brought his hand up in a crisp salute. Not the lazy, half-committed kind you sometimes saw in the rear. A proper one. Respect without a word wasted. Elena returned it, holding his eyes for a second. "Just do your job private," she said softly. "That's all any of us can ask." He dropped his hand, nodded, and jogged away to catch up with his squad. As the day wound down, the fob settled into its usual rhythm. Mortar alarms might sound that night. Another mission would be briefed tomorrow. Somewhere else in the theater, another unit would be walking into their own version of a dusty intersection with too many variables and not enough certainty. But in this battalion, at least for a while, there would be one less quiet professional, dismissed as too cautious before anyone bothered to ask what scars they carried, because word got around. It filtered through platoon hooches and smoke pits, through late-night card games and guarded conversations near the wire. The story of a general who'd snapped, "You're not fit to lead," at a major in the talk hand, then watched that same major take the net and drag a battalion out of a kill zone he'd insisted was safe, and maybe, somewhere watching this story years later, someone who'd been written off, talked over, or laughed at in their own way, would recognize themselves in that quiet officer at the map board. Someone who'd been called too cautious, too soft, not a real leader. For them, the lesson would be simple. Never underestimate the quiet one in the room, the one who doesn't brag, doesn't shout, and doesn't feel the need to prove anything with noise. When everything starts to fall apart, when the plans of loud men begin to fail, it's usually that quiet professional, the one you dismiss, that everyone ends up turning to. And if you're watching this from your own corner of the world, whether it's a base overseas, a small town back home, or somewhere in between, maybe you've lived a version of this. Maybe you've been underestimated until the moment your work spoke louder than anyone's opinion. When the video ends, tell your story. Tell us where you're watching from. 'Cause out there, in 1,000 different places, there are 1,000 different Valkyries, quiet professionals whose names will never make it into speeches, but whose decisions keep entire units, families, and teams together when it matters most.